How are things down the other end? This is like living in Pittsburgh, if you can call that living.
Yeah, a couple of people have made that observation that it's like working in a foreign country, working in Pittsburgh.
It gives a lot of freedom.
And well, you know, in addition to freedom, it gives you a different perspective. You're not so much a victim of trends, of popular thinking, of, you know, what's in the state-of-the-art head right now.
This is a scene from Night of the Living Dead, a low-budget film co-authored, directed, photographed, and edited by George Romero in 1968. Already the head of a successful commercial production house in Pittsburgh, this was his first venture into feature filmmaking. Its flaws were mainly budgetary, while its virtues were clearly visionary, earning it popular success as a horror film and a cult following for exploratory uses of genre and technique. Style is difficult to define, but even in this disembodied clip, the technical aspects of Romero's style are making themselves apparent. They're in his cutting, his camera angles, in his two-dimensional design within the film frame. Great spatial movements from shot to shot, and even within shots. Just making films in Pittsburgh for 10 years has become a sort of stylistic statement. In January of '78, Romero and his producer, Richard Rubinstein, allowed a film crew from the School of Visual Arts onto the set of their latest production, the second part of the Dead trilogy, Dawn of the Dead. Using footage shot over one long weekend, a documentary took shape, focusing first on the filmmaking process and secondly on directorial vision. What part of it reaches the screen unhampered? What external forces affected? But first, let's introduce our cast. In pre-production, George Romero, screenwriter. Richard Rubinstein, producer. In production, George Romero, directing. Richard Rubinstein, producing. Michael Gornick, cinematographer. Carl Augenstein, lighting director. Tom Savini, creator of special makeup, actor and stuntman. Ken Foray, actor. Scott Reiniger, actor. David Emge, actor. John Amplis, actor in Martin and casting director of Dawn. And in post-production, editing the film. Pre-production involves writing the screenplay, raising the money, and organizing the shoot.
All aboard! Good morning. Hi. How about Pittsburgh? 10 hours of Pittsburgh. Is there Barker on your left? Adam traveling alone?
All alone.
Shall I wake you from Pittsburgh?
No, I'm going to New York.
The Big Apple.
Right.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
These are the opening moments of Martin, a film Romero made just before dawn. As the story unfolds, you'll see the screenplay qualities, all inherently cinematic, which begin to articulate his style. First, the visual imperative. With few exceptions, cinema relies as little as possible on the spoken word. Characterization and plot are best revealed through action and accumulation of detail. Montage concepts begin in the screenplay. The story is developing with literally no dialogue, and suspense is being generated not only in the horror of the situation, but in the mystery of the plot itself. We still don't know his identity, his motives, or his goal. Romero's use of dual linear movement fleshes out the two dimensions of film into three, a use of such devices as the manipulation of time, or other devices such as irony. As you can see from the final page of the Dawn screenplay, Romero's use of the form is unorthodox, in a medium where one page generally equals 1 minute of film.
The script seems long. Did you plan to shoot it all? I mean, giving yourself leeway in the cutting to...
Pretty much, yeah. I usually write long scripts. Martin was a long script that was really a long script. I mean, and the first cut came out at almost 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Wow.
This is a long script that seems long. It's not really long. There's so much description, and if you read those pages, there's so much action described in great paragraphs where I got carried away, you know, describing the action itself. And some of those things take a second and a half, you know. And it's not cutting that long. I cut the first half of the film, and it came in at 45 minutes. So I think the first cut will probably be about a 2-hour cut.
Great.
Which is not bad for a first cut.
To what extent do other influences creep into a work, and at what stage?
A lot of people have often compared you to Hitchcock, but you don't buy that. How come?
They have some nerve. No, I don't. Well, filmmaking is funny. Filmmakers, all artists, I guess, to some extent, are parasitic of what they've seen, and what they are basically imitating, what attracted them in the first place. Filmmakers, maybe more than any other form. I mean, it's not like you can sit down with a pencil and do your thing, or a canvas, or whatever. It's very expensive, and very few people get enough chance to work with the hardware, and get enough chance to really develop a style, or except on a very intellectual level. That's why, unfortunately, the state of the art has somewhat gone towards menus and pre-planning and everything else, which is a little bit destructive. I would say that if I'm parasitic of anybody, it's more Wells and some of the early, like Howard Hawks and people like that. Those are the films that really affected me. There are certain Hitchcockian things that are, first of all, I don't consciously, when I'm setting up a shot, say, wow, remember that shot? And then try to imitate that. there are Hitchcock-type influences. I think the sequence in the cemetery in Night of the Living Dead, where you see the figure way in the background and you don't really know what it is, and then it gradually gets worked into the plot. It starts to become a threat, and then the threat is a real threat. That's kind of a Hitchcockian sequence.
Hey, I mean, praying's for church, huh? Come on.
I haven't seen you in church lately.
Well, there's not much sense in my going to church. Do you remember one time when we were small, we were out here? It was from right over there. I jumped out at you from behind the tree, and Grandpa got all excited, and he shook his fist at me, and he said, "Boy, you be damned to hell." Remember that? Right over there. Well, you used to really be scared here.
Johnny.
You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
He'll hear you.
Here he comes now. I'm getting out of here.
Johnny.
A couple of pieces that I've seen written about Night of the Living Dead say that it takes us back to silent cinema storytelling.
Oh! No! Johnny! Help me!
I can see now a couple of specific things in a couple of my films that are Hitchcockian in that way. Sometimes people say it because of the plot lines being, there are certain ironies in the plots that I use. I don't think it has anything to do with form. I think that's more a content association that people are making. The Thing was the movie that knocked me down when I was a kid. That's the one, I think, horror film, everyone says, what attracts you to the genre. And it was probably The Thing. I was the right age at exactly the right time, and it had exactly the right effect on me. I never forgot it.
The scenographics of The Thing and those of Night and Dawn are remarkably similar. Confined spaces within which groups of protagonists are eternally on guard against a deadly foe. Tranquility never exists in Romero's world.
Yeah, but Susu, you could also say his style's derived from D.W. Griffith's because he uses close-ups. The truth of it is, artists imprint distinctive auras on their films. Genre is a term which should have been invented by the distributors. For the artist, it's just a departure point.
Thank you. Casting occurs in pre-production. Is it an irony in both Night and Dawn that Romero's main protagonists are black?
In Night of the Living Dead, the character, if you read the script, if you read my shooting script, the character is never described in terms of his color. And Dwayne was the best actor that we knew from among our friends, which is where we cast that film. The way we cast that film, and so he did the part. Now, consciously, I resisted writing new dialogue because he happened to be black, and just let it play when we just shot the script. As we started to shoot and got into it, we lived at that farmhouse, and so we were always into raps about the, implications and the meaning and stuff like that. So some of that maybe crept into the film. But I think in both Night and Dawn, the biggest job that all of us had during the production of both of those films was subduing all of those thoughts, because those things can really interfere with what you're doing, and what you're doing on the surface is making a comic book. So those ironies that you're talking about are, I think, that selection process is something, again, that happened at script stage, or on a consciousness level somewhere beneath the craft of making the film.
Our news cameras have just returned from covering such a search and destroy operation against the ghouls. This one
Themes,
conducted by Sheriff
motifs,
Conan
and
McCullough,
metaphors
Butler
trace
County
back to the
Station.
screenplay stage.
Let's go to that film report.
Why does the media play such an important part in his
The
films?
military has been organized to search out and destroy the marauding ghouls.
I worked in television so long that maybe it's just an important part of my background. I also just have a lot of attitudes about what that reach, that whole communications electronic box has done to everybody. So I guess I tend to take jabs at it.
The plan is, kill the brain, and you kill the ghoul.
What do you think from the supply wagon, Cuz?
No, we're all right.
Okay. Hey, Cash, put that thing all the way in the fire. We don't want it getting up again. All right, I got you.
Chief McClellan, how's everything going?
Oh, things aren't going too bad. Men are taking it pretty good. You want to get on the other side of the road over there?
Chief, do you think we'll be able to defeat these things?
Well, we killed 19 of them today right in this area. Those last 3 we caught trying to claw their way into an abandoned shed. They must have thought somebody was in there. There wasn't, though.
If I have people on the television not really answering the question but making it more confusing, that's conscious. That's been the conscious part of that. Because that's generally what it's about, you know. Ladies and gentlemen, there was just a plane crash. It took out a small piece of Manhattan. More later. You know, it's never reassuring or, you know, it's always alarming. Yeah. And that's been a kind of conscious through line.
The producer is in a key position during pre-production, securing funds, putting the film into a viable financial and legal position, and thereafter protecting the director.
I think that we tend to operate in more European style in terms of the way we produce and the way George directs, and that we tend to follow Sarris's auteur theory of direction, in that I see my function as a producer in terms of providing George Romero with a brush, palette, and canvas. And his creative control is absolute in terms of the film itself, that he's the script writer, that he's the director, and that he's the editor. And it's totally the product of one man's vision on a creative level. This is the largest budget that George has had to work with in terms of production. And I think that he's got enough money here to do what he wants to do. Okay, it's not an excessive amount of money by traditional Hollywood standards. This is a low-budget picture. Of course, anything under $2.5 million is considered low budget in terms of the major studios.
The biggest difference, really, well, in Dawn, is working with a little bit of money and still being satisfied with the product. In fact, it was easier. I mean, I was paranoid about it up front because just having that extra weight is a trip. But I'm comfortable with what Dawn of the Dead is, and the extra money that it took to make it what it is was really not a hindrance at all. It was a big, big help. You know, a lot of people say, I can't work with money, I can't work with a lot of people around.
This film was financed in somewhat of a traditional way, in that it's co-financed internationally, that a group headed by Dario Argento in Italy co-financed the film with us. And our end of the co-financing comes from private individuals. But I think it was unique in that this project started off with 2 creative people getting together, Dario Argento and George Romero, and then the business side came after that point.
Now the physical production begins. In this second stage, the director and cinematographer stand to share equally in importance for what is captured on film. It's the 8th week of the Dawn shoot. We're in an $80 million mall in Pittsburgh, which Romero is allowed to use each night from 11 till 7 in the morning.
Everyone ready? Camera.
Rolling.
Sound.
Roll it.
He does not get uptight. He asks me if it's possible and asks me how much time it's going to take. And then he'll give me a straight yes or no on whether to do it. There's no bullshit, there's no yelling. It's been a very, for a shoot this long under these conditions, I'd say it's been absolutely wonderful.
George Romero directs pretty much the way he is. Pleasant, relaxed, great sense of humor, and intelligence, so the combinations work well. There's no hurry, there's no pressure. We discuss it, and usually there are very few words exchanged. You know, there are ideas and few words, and we've got it. The man's like water in your ship, so you just float along and do the job.
Okay. Ready?
Quiet.
Good. Rolling, kid.
Action.
The best thing about him is that he gets across what he wants without telling you. I don't know how he does it, but it's incredible. Because he's so clear about what he wants all the time. And I mean, I think, like when he's working, he's like editing it at the same time.
That when he says it looks good, I mean, we've learned that indeed it will look good because he has a very good eye.
The atmosphere which pervaded the dawn shoot was unusual for a film production in this country. And while good films have been created by directors who were universally despised, there's no doubt that chemistry counts.
I think George likes confidence, of course, in his crew, but I think mainly he likes to work with people he feels at ease with. That they have to be confident, but beyond that, he likes people he can work with till 7 o'clock in the morning, like we did today, and feel at ease with them. You know, there's a lot of rapping that goes on constantly on the shoots. A lot of fun, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of hard work. It's a joy working with George because he accepts a lot of input in terms of what I see, or, you know, it's amazing. There's even suggestions that come oftentimes from crew members, you know, through me, and he's very willing to accept those observations. And, you know, a lot of his film is input from the crew. There's a lot of freedom. It's a real democracy with George.
The Dawn production took a month off in December rather than remove and restore the holiday decorations every night, losing hours of shooting time. Romero used that month to cut what he had already shot. By the time the school crew arrived, 4 weeks into the second round of shooting, he had covered the screenplay well enough to stop at any point and edit the footage into release form. It was now in an improvisational stage where new ideas were being developed.
This picture is really designed for right now. It's much more of a comic book. It's much lighter.
It didn't seem so in the script. In fact, the scene we saw being shot yesterday at the pie fight was,
didn't appear in the script.
No, and I've heard rumors that the ending has been also changed.
Yeah. In fact, we shot both because I wasn't willing to give up the tragic ending. But this film, Dawn of the Dead, has it's a very romanticized film.
The major change that's happened that I can see from my conceptions of upon first reading it and now is that it's lightening up. You know, when I first read it, I thought it was awfully shocking, you know, to think of just in terms of numbers of bodies being maimed and gallons of blood being spilled. But there's a quality coming out that is counterweighting that. It's definitely becoming more of a fantasy to me, more of an adventure to me than I first conceived of it from, you know, upon first reading it.
Well, I think the special effects are a substantial portion of the budget, where prior to this they were less so in George's other films. It's a number of explosions, a number of cosmetic effects that Tom Savini does. All of those things take a certain amount of time and a certain amount of budgetary support in order to get them to work. They don't always work the first time.
A squib is simply a detonator. But we placed a detonator in a tube that was filled with gunpowder. And that was placed inside a prophylactic, which was filled with blood. So when the blast went off, the concussion blew the prophylactic and the blood from beneath the clothing. We're in this mall when the mall closes. The mall closes, 9:30 or so. We start coming in around 8 o'clock to get set up and everything. So we only have until 7 in the morning before we have to stop shooting because we got to get all our stuff out and the mall opens. So there'll be times in a particular night where we're shooting all over the script. So it has to be done fast because that all has to be done in 7 hours, you know. George is a wonderful guy. You can say to George, he'll sit there, be very cool, no expression on his face. You can say to him, George, I got this fabulous idea. Why don't we take a screwdriver? Let's say a maintenance man has a screwdriver on his belt and have a maintenance man zombie attack Scott. Scott pulls a screwdriver out of his bag and sticks it in the zombie's ear and shoves it into the brain, you know. George will go, okay. Yeah, you know. You could say, George, how about if we get dragons coming out of the fountains in the mall? I'm sure he'd go, yeah, okay. You know. You can't shake him. The first half of the shooting was very organized, and there wasn't a great deal of improvisation because most of the big effects were done in the first part of the shoot. The things that George wrote in the script, you know, we planned ahead, we knew exactly, we would stand around in the office and he would walk the whole thing through and be a zombie, be the victim, be the helicopter, you know. Very organized. This shoot's a little different. We've created characters on our own, you know, like I've created a character, and a friend of mine, another stuntman's created a character, and he's been developing those characters within the, like as we shoot, day by day. So it's like really loose, this half of the shoot, and just as much fun.
How many zombies are you making up tonight?
It depends. It depends on what we're doing in the script. You know, some nights we'll have 200, sometimes we'll have 5. You know, nights we have 5. You know, they're the concentrated scenes between like one lead. And put 5 around, so it looks like, you know, a continuation of the 200 the day before. You know, it depends. Like I say, it depends on the what's on the script for that night.
Can you explain a little about what you're doing right now?
Okay, these are foam latex appliances sticking on his face. So the zombies are people that have died in interesting ways, or not interesting ways, just people who have died and come back to life. A lot of them look like car accident victims, cancer patients, you know. The one guy came in here in a suit, a 3-piece suit, beautiful 3-piece suit, so I made him up like a mortician would at a funeral parlor, and he was like beautiful, you know, overly made up, you know, with lipstick and all that, so he was walking around like a fresh one, you know. Okay, you have to lean forward just a bit so I can powder all this. You probably get a little of your shirt here. Others are like people who have been bitten by other zombies and who have died and become zombies, and they're the ones that are the grossest. I don't know what happened to you. Car accident, zombie bit your face off or something like that. See, the fun of this thing is inventing all this stuff.
You only one clothesline?
Okay, close your eyes. And I'm covering them with stuff called rubber mask grease paint. It's a grease paint that has more castor oil in it. Keeps the rubber piece from drying out and changing color after the makeup has been on it for a while. You know. You sculpt them in clay, you make a mold of them, then you pour foam latex in the mold, you bake it in an oven. I took a big photo tray and sculpted a zillion wounds, cast them, you know, I had those. And I did another one, cast them, and I had those wounds. So every now and then when I'm making a piece, and I have foam latex left over, I'll pour it in one of these slabs, you know, and I'll have some extra wounds laying around.
Are there any schools that teach that?
No, not that I know of. I had to teach myself.
A director must be a psychologist. He must also be a storyboarder, an editor, linking the disparate sensibilities of cast and crew with his own vision.
Okay, if it's straight up, we can do it with hands, yeah.
Tom Savini, now on the other side of the camera, is about to essay a difficult stunt which will portray his demise on screen. One can see, under these specialized circumstances, Romero effortlessly fulfilling his ongoing roles as prime mover of the production.
Keep going, keep going, keep going.
Ready, Tom?
It looks a little off.
Keep going.
But I mean,
Okay, good.
Anytime, Tom.
All set?
Anytime.
Is he rolling?
Stand by.
you gotta go right there, Tom?
Yeah, from here.
Ready, Mike? Joe Shelby's hand around on Mike? Holding the bench on the left.
Oh, no, I can't see any bench holder. Okay.
Quiet, please. Okay, Mike?
Ready.
Out of sight.
Yeah.
What about the approach you're taking in directing it? I had thought that Night of the Living Dead was pretty tightly storyboarded. Is that true?
It was and it wasn't. A lot of the sequences were, as a lot of the sequences in this film are.
Oh. Because while we've been here, it seems very
It's
loose.
been loose, but well, you've been here only for a few scenes too. Some of the scenes, as you watch the interlock, I think you'll find to be very, very close to the way that script is written.
Storyboarding refers most commonly to a series of artist renderings prepared in pre-production. In production, each shot will correspond to one of these sketches.
George is a genius in that respect. He can memorize his own storyboards, and he prepares them himself. And Chris's AD has helped in that respect too, but he doesn't literally storyboard his shots, you know. He's a very complex director. You know, he likes to keep it to himself in terms of the actual storyboarding of blocking scenes, and he brings it with him to the set, you know. That's his style.
There are certain things that I want to happen that build on each other.
in this film, the people starting to get tempted and attracted by the mall and starting to get, or adopting their military approach to taking it over. And those are the things that I try to keep as close as possible to the script. The sequence with when they go and get the trucks and block off the outside of the mall, and, because there's a certain build that was written into the script, which I really think adds to the overall flow of the suspense of the film.
Here in a later scene from Martin, Romero's modern vampire story, one can feel a tight, pre-structured quality indicative of storyboarding.
I had a copy of the script about a month and a half or two before we started shooting, and he already had it storyboarded to an extent.
There's a lot of quick cuts of you creeping down hallways, and how would you hit your mark emotionally?
I generally didn't worry too much about it emotionally. I was more interested in hitting the mark and being in the right place.
Who are you?
Well,
Oh, my God. Oh.
Let's not get excited about this now. That's no reason to get upset about anything, okay?
I don't know him!
were the scenes very tightly blocked off?
They weren't tightly blocked, but they were blocked because of being such an action scene. You know, we had written blocking just as if we would work in a theater. Of course, Martin was a small shoot. Generally not more than 8 people on the set in total.
Dawn had, I think, 35 in staff and hundreds in actors.
Yeah, many nights, hundreds. His attention was being pulled away all too often, so he kept himself pretty much by himself during that. But his overall attitude with actors was pretty much the same.
Now, your role in Dawn was on the other side of the camera.
I was casting director. Mostly my job was recruiting zombies.
Creative compromise is the name of the game in filmmaking. Logistics of production force one to make decisions counter to the original concept, but ultimately beneficial.
Well, we were talking before about the fact that when he got to the mall, it had a different atmosphere than he already thought about Dawn having. The mall also brought a futuristic look to the film. It was so vast.
The idea of the mall itself, the moment we see it, the moment we come in and see what it is, I think it's going to become obvious in terms of what we're saying about the false security of, consumer society.
It's a great metaphor. It's a great set too. Great location.
It's a great location. We couldn't do it without a mall like this, and we were really lucky to get it.
How has it been working with it? Have there been some
Great.
problems?
There have been a few problems.
Mainly
but
technical?
Mainly technical. No real people problems at all.
When I read it, I could easily picture the editing. I mean, your style, playing the angles. Right. But I didn't picture the color designs or what the mall would really look like.
All of those influences, everyone's attitude towards the thing, as well as my own desire, I think, to lighten things up and go more action, adventure.
First of all, you're dealing, as I said, with 300-400 extras in some scenes. You're dealing with a shopping mall as our primary set, where their primary business is, in fact, selling consumer goods, and integrating what we want to do with the life of the mall has been an arduous and complicated task. There is no way to pay, or let's say that there is, but it's way beyond our capacity to pay in dollar values what the use of the mall is worth. The people that own the shopping mall have been aesthetically attached to filmmaking, and they are getting enough money so that it doesn't cost them anything to have us in here. which is an expensive proposition in itself. But if they, in terms of looking at it, are they making a profit on our being involved with them? No, that's not the case.
What about insurance?
Insurance is a very costly item, and particularly where you're dealing in public places. If a little old lady tends to see a zombie, or happens to see a zombie wandering around with makeup and has a heart attack, that's a potential problem. I don't want to limit that to little old ladies, but anyone. So yes, the insurance tab on this particular picture is a substantial number.
All right? Okay.
All right.
Yeah, all right, Stevie. All right. Great, Stevie.
Obviously, you can't light a place this size without spending a week to light it. We discussed doing the whole thing in one shot, rehearse it for 30 days and shoot it one day. But so we have to keep it pretty low, otherwise there would be really dead areas in it.
The situation is not enough time, not enough lights, and incredibly large spaces to deal with. And I think the large spaces and the fact that we're shooting a large number of angles on any given shot are the biggest problem. We'll do a setup, an initial setup, and shoot one angle, and the director will immediately call for a reversal on it. Now, normally that's not too big a problem, but in this case, one reversal might encompass 200 or 300 feet of mall area, where you have background just to fill in, just to create touches, to avoid black holes. Hot spots, there's glass everywhere, creating reflections. My first reaction was total panic. I aggravated myself to death because I wanted it to be better. The initial shots were so big that I had to use every light to its absolute fullest amount. I couldn't skip a couple of, sections and say, oh, I'll fill them in with another light. I mean, I had to know that between every 10 feet there had to be something, or every certain area there had to be a highlight or a spot. I had to know that, and I had to know exactly what it was. And I went back to my books and I read performance figures on every lamp that I have and measured things and went through it over and over again. And finally it came out. We got the initial setup done and it worked. And I felt like about 5 million pounds was taken off my head.
Well, we're swinging with it on the very, very, very big shots. Right here, right now, we're using a lot of tungsten. We're pushing one stop, and we're working with ease under that situation. For the very, very big shots, we're pushing one again and using some Zeiss Pistagon lenses, and with the 1.4, which gives us plenty of light to shoot on.
So the whole basis of this film for me is to go in and set up areas. Set a main source of light, and that's not particularly a key light. It's a source of light, whether it be a lamp or ceiling light or a window light, whatever it is. Then I sit back and I look at what's there and build upon that. A lot of the situations are available light because it's the only possible way to shoot it. The shots are either too large or the movement is too fast to light. That's really the biggest problem, is the time situation. We've managed by doing basically area lighting, by bouncing a lot of light around, creating natural effects, not lighting to the shot, but lighting areas.
Okay, arrives at the column. Ricochet is ready. Let's go for one more. Let's go for just one more shot. Have it in and come off to fake cocking action. Fire off one, and then just hold. You can almost hold in your aiming mode, and you realize that there's too many yet. Sorry. We can get all bent out of shape when I hold it. I can see more of them coming around the corner.
Okay.
Ready, Mike? Quiet. Sound? Rolling.
6:59, take 7, sound 13:43.
I've never worked with any other director in terms of a feature, but I know the reaction to George's style, how he gets so many setups in 1 hour. The other directors might spend 3 or 4 hours on a shot, whereas George, I don't think could ever do that.
Okay.
Yeah, we've discussed angles and style on a previous film we did called Martin. And we pretty much maintain that mode when we shoot horror stuff, which is a lot of wide angle, low positions to accentuate, you know, the monster aspects of the zombies or whatever. That's pretty much it in terms of any adapted style, which we've, you know, intensified in this film or any previous horror films which we've done. This film allows us to be a little more graceful and a little more beautiful with our photography, because it's not simply a horror film. In fact, one of our worries was that we were getting a little too far away from the horror genre, but I can help it along. I understand where he's going. I work with him enough now that I understand his direction.
George tends to set up scenes and then let them happen, rather than being extremely, extremely precise about every movement of every actor and the delivery of every line. If he's not happy with the way it comes out the first time, he will do another take, obviously. But I think overall, style-wise, I think that it's consistent. I think that it's a little bit more traditional in that he is using, how can I say, a more standard approach in terms of reverses and two shots on dialogue and the like. Not a lot, but somewhat.
Well, we shoot anywhere from 15 to 20 to 1.
Senores, please to let me pass.
I cover conversations with a master.
No, please. Just let me pass. I go up to 7th floor to find my sister.
And then with single headshots on everybody involved.
People of 107 will do what you wish now. These are simple people. They have little, but they do not give it up easily. And they're dead. They give up to no one.
Not so much cutaways. In other words, I'll cut to all of the people, or I'll use people as their own cutaways.
Many have died last week on these streets. In the basement of this building, we find them. I have given them the last rites. Now, you do what you will. You are stronger than us, but soon, I think, they be stronger than you.
And sometimes if I see a shot I like, I'll just go do it, almost on whim.
Let the dead walk, senores. We must stop the killing, or we lose the war.
Out here, shooting, I don't really think too much about the cutting. I'd rather let that happen too, except in tightly choreographed sequences like the truck scene and so forth, where I know what's cutting to what.
In this action scene, notice how he has isolated the three leads to better manipulate the visuals. Right. Close-ups, medium shots, long shots.
One look, man.
Visceral, disorienting angles, rhythm and tension potentials to be inherited by himself on the editing table. The most celebrated shot in Night is this one. A close-up of one zombie gives way to an extreme long shot of several of them, and the film transforms into a vision of doom. A revelation in space multiplies the horror far beyond our expectations. As a spatial stylist, Romero is consistent. He is a master of spatial design.
Yeah, I never really put it down to the use of space, except that's what it is. It has to do with, again, it's just breaking from tradition. I mean, there are ways that you're supposed to shoot that, involving screen direction and involving, you know, a formal patternized kind of cutting, which I just don't like. I think if the scene is a tension-filled scene, or if it's a suspenseful scene or a very active scene, which is meant to grate, everything should grate. how much you work with film, it never ceases to amaze me how different it is once it's up there and you're watching all your footage. It's very hard to translate when you're on the set. You can't imagine what it's going to look like in 2 dimensions, up there that big with electronic amplification. But I don't think it's insecurity to say that, well, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, so I'm going to shoot it another way. I mean, that's just exploration. There's a lot of films like watercolor. There's a lot of accidents, and it's learning how to control the accidents, and that's where you just need to keep doing a lot of work.
The key creative force in post-production is the editor, who, in this case, also happens to be the director.
There are a few scenes, like we do a housing project scene where we raid this housing project in the beginning, and there's this, there are a couple of families in the apartments there that we come in and we're throwing them out of the housing project, and various people are killed, and the way some of them are killed just make you go like that, you know. And I saw some of the stuff being shot, but the scenes, but when he put it together, it was, I was riveted to the scene. I couldn't believe it, you know. Yeah, it was pretty powerful. Definitely not boring.
It has been said that Romero doesn't allow us to look at his shots. Rather, his cutting forces us to experience them. This is as true of night as it is of Martin. As it is of dawn. Considering that quick cutting will wear an audience down emotionally, it is remarkable that he can maintain such a level of tension in his films. They contain almost twice as many cuts as any other directors.
He conceptualizes during takes exactly what he needs, and he's very, very efficient with his shots. Some call it choppy, or, you know, some call it heavy-handed in terms of the editorial style.
George's commercial background, if you will, has set the tone for his cutting, that he has a commercial reel that I think is slick as anybody out of New York or Los Angeles, Mellon Bank and U.S. Steel and Rockwell and Heinz, and he used to make very, very slick 30-second commercials, and he learned a discipline whereby you have to say something very, very quickly, concisely, and get the message across.
The Calgon story. What happens when a Calgon research team and their submarine are reduced to micro size and sent on a dangerous mission deep inside a washing machine?
Engines reversed full, Captain. We're stuck.
We've got to find out what's on those fibers.
Trapped in the fibers of a giant T-shirt, the Calgonauts discover secrets of gray, dull-looking laundry.
Why, it feels like...
Leftover detergent film. The fibers are covered with this stuff.
Oh, this box has never been opened.
Add the Calgon.
You'll thrill as Calgon dissolves the dirty leftover detergent film.
It's working. The gray is gone. The fibers are clean.
Let's get out of here.
I think I'm in love with you.
If you're tired of dull detergent films and grade B washes, thrill to The Calgon Story at your nearby family washing machine.
This has been transposed into his feature editing, so that there is very rarely a let-up in the action. I don't think there are very many shots that last 4 or 5 seconds on screen. There are not those long camera moves revolving around. All George would do would cut them up if Mike did them.
I shoot a lot, and because I know that I can make the decisions later on the cutting table. And so I wind up shooting a lot of material that I fall in love with and I really like, and there's just economically no room for it in the final piece. So it's harder, and it's very hard to be, when I sit down and I say, okay, now here are 10 scenes that I like, which 2 are the least needed? That's a very difficult process for me. And I think that's where all your bias comes in, and all your emotions. It's very difficult. It's a lot easier to edit when you're up front, when you're writing. You know, there's a lot of people that work with really a formula in terms of when to use the master, when to go in, and all that. And people will say that's very shattering if you don't follow some kind of a pattern, or if there isn't some kind of an expected cutting pace that people can relax and get comfortable with. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think people notice cuts. Or if they're well done, if they're not shattering or jarring, you don't notice them at all. And there's a sequence in Martin, for example, which could have been just a murder sequence, but it's elongated as far as I thought it could be elongated.
Emergency number, call 911.
I can't call 911, that's the police.
It's not the police, it's just a general emergency number.
And some of the actions are very mundane, dealing with the telephones.
Yeah!
Look, call the hospital, tell them what happened, all right? Tell them we're coming, we'll be there in 5 minutes.
But all of those actions, no matter how mundane, become interesting when you look at them in a certain way.
Mercy, is Mercy around here?
Mercy, okay, I don't know the number.
All information, get the number, call them.
They're all part of the overall action that's going on, and they all help to build a certain amount of suspense, because they're things that we deal with every day.
Shit, it's fucked up. Wait a minute. I gotta do it again. I can't get through. I forgot the number. Wait,
I don't like sloughing sequences off. You know, I don't like car chases that don't do anything.
Yeah.
You know, because within, you know, a fight in this room that encompasses like 3 punches being thrown. I'm not talking about a big brawl. I could, you know, you could do a 3-punch fight and make it last 5 minutes. You know, because everything's valid and everything is information, and I like to deal with detail. And I'd like to just go with a visual, you know, almost a kind of a cubist look at that. And that's another place where I'll just shoot a lot of film. I use a lot of sound elements, and I cut rather than on a flatbed, on a table with a synchronizer. And there's a certain kind of tactile thing that I get into in terms of the tracks. It's a visual, almost checkerboarding of the tracks. And I don't use film as leader. I always use white, because I like to see that white-brown juxtaposition of the tracks. And I like to lay the tracks across on a table, and you can almost visualize how the track is working. And I use a lot of track, and I cut, when I do my first cut, I don't just cut picture voice. I cut with some kind of music and with effects, and rather than...
So you use pre-recorded music, like, to get the inherent rhythms going?
Yeah, to get some kind of rhythm going, until I find a rhythm going. And then I wind up with a lot of tracks. I mean, for a small independent stuff. I mean, I've seen studio productions where they get into, 30, 40 tracks, but that's just because they're too lazy to lay them in sometimes. But I use 12 to 15 tracks. And I like a lot of sound. I hate dead air. I'll always use some kind of an ambience and a lot of music, which is just all form stuff. Some people say that my tracks are too driving or too full, but that's just personal preference,
In summary, this sequence from Dawn clearly demonstrates Romero's style. Conceptualized in the screenplay stage, given substance during shooting, and given shape in the editing.
We don't make distribution arrangements till after we finish a picture. Not wanting to have too many fingers in the pie too soon, not wanting to compromise from ground zero. Eventually we may have to make some compromises on a business level, but at least they start later.
Right.
And we finish the picture, so it's a matter of maybe taking something out.
This statement was made during production and carried with it an ominous note which reverberated for over a year as Romero fought for his version of the film, a strong vision that stood as a thorn in the side of negotiations with distributors, even after Dawn opened to tremendous business in Europe. Finally, a breakthrough was achieved.
We made a couple of errors in signing the distribution deal with Night of the Living Dead, in that we sold or we signed a distribution deal worldwide. We didn't hold out any rights, television, Canada, Europe, nothing, 16 millimeter, nothing. We gave the distributor the world. Basically, I didn't know anything then about the business side of things and about how to draw a contract. Now, knowing what I know now, you want to ask for as many of those controls as you can possibly get your hands on. If you have a smash hit film out in theaters, your 16 millimeter rights are going to be worth a lot. Your television rights are going to be worth a lot.
Right.
So, principally, I would say that. Hold out for as much as you can hold out for.
There were a number of people that offered us substantial amounts of money to deliver an R-rated film, which meant we anticipated cutting the guts out of the movie in order to get that R. We looked for a distributor who recognized, as we did, that the best economic course of action was to leave the film untampered, even though that created other problems. It created the potential problem of a newspaper not taking the ad. It created the problem of a TV station not running a commercial, a certain theater not playing the film. We believe that ultimately, economically, those problems would cost less and we would make more if the film was left as George wanted it.
Several of the distributors that wanted it badly, understanding the problems, for example, with the MPAA here in this country, that the MPAA would probably X the film, and the only way to get an R would be to cut it. So I wound up holding out during the negotiations, and luckily, Richard backed me up all the way on this, because there were a couple of times when it would have been easier to take a deal. Would have been financially easier to take a deal.
Right.
And that's the other thing. I think that Richard and I have had a good relationship that way. So, I don't have to worry about my own internal team. That's big, number one. But having Richard's support, I was just able to sit there and say, look, I'm not going to cut the picture. When the distributor took his stance to put the picture out unrated, it's not that he wasn't accepting the restrictions of an X, because he's putting a flag on it that says that no one under 17 will be admitted. Forget with a parent, not at all. He's accepting those restrictions. What he's not accepting is the symbol itself, the X, because the X does automatically say to most people in America that this picture is obscene.
For a major company in the industry to release a film without a rating is a major break. And that was something that was long and hard in finding. We basically are in agreement with a system which flags movies and tells people what they're going to see. Our point is there should not be economic penalties attached to that.
But then I also had to fight, and you always have to fight for things like length. Usually with an exploitation picture, a distributor will say, it's terrific and I love it, but cut it to 90 minutes. Once again, there's no secret. I can't teach you how to get the kind of controls that enable you to leave your picture longer or to have that kind of creative cut. It's a matter of just holding out for it and not selling until somebody gives it to you. And I was able to do that partially because of my reputation, but partially just because I sat there and said no.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of sticky times when people would get up from the negotiating table and walk and go home. And you got to sit through, and those are the toughest times. You got to just sit through that and say, okay, we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. And we did see him tomorrow, and they ultimately said, okay, it can be your cut.
Let me give you something on audio you might want to use.
Yes, okay, keep it going.
Just roll for a second.
Great.
I think that there are very few directors that have total, final, real last cut on their movies. I say that when they tell you that these are the rules for the system, and you can't do it another way, they're not correct. It can be done other ways. You can maintain control of your product. I'm not saying it's easy, but it can be done. You don't have to be in New York or Hollywood in order to produce films, to get attention. Okay, I think we're the proof of that, and I would be as encouraging as possible to people to do what everybody else says you can't do.
So Night of the Living Dead is the beginning, and this is the end.
This is the middle.
This is the middle of it.
Room for more? There's plenty of room for more. Zombies are still down.